love the title, and I love it mostly because in it a is the idea that if you can find what you think you did in a situation, you can also find the empowerment to get out, right? You come into this company, and the first thing that happens, of course, is that a company, when you have an interview, they tell you, let's see if you fit into our culture. And I think that's, in essence, is already something to where you start twisting and turning away and putting a little bit of your heart and a little bit of your future in the hands of somebody else. I know firsthand how the workplace can really have a negative effect on your life, on your friends, on your family. When you look at people that are leaders, people that are truly going to be great in this life, they lift you up. They don't push you down.
Life flows like an endless ocean of stories. We often miss these precious tales as we rush through our days, too consumed by daily struggles to notice the poetry swirling around us. Yet within these stories lie the keys to our past, sparks for our creativity, and fresh winds to fill our sails. I am Abhra, a writer based in Melbourne, in quest of those stories with diverse voices that tell them from every corner of the world. Welcome to Stories and Stanza. Hi Carolina, welcome to Stories and Stanza. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Well, good evening for you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And yes, I had a nice day. We are on different ends of the same day.
Different ends of the world, actually. You
That
are all the way in Australia, and I'm all the way in Portugal.
yes, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. We are going to talk about something very important topic in today's professional world. For our audience, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So I am Carolina Bakker. I'm the rat race recovery coach, and I support people that are either in or have left a toxic workplace environment. I support companies in improving their workplace wellness so that their employees feel safe and supported and able to express themselves. And of course, that leads to people wanting to stay and wanting to come to work in the morning. And that ultimately leads to much better results. So, yes, that's in that capacity is why I'm here as a coach for all these groups and mostly around workplace wellness.
Wonderful. This particular segment in the podcast failed with me. I wanted to create a supportive space where we look into our failures and remove the stigma from failure and understand. So, when I had a difficult phase myself, I thought about writing and decided to call it Fail With Me. That is how this series got started. Gradually, as more and more guests joined, they enriched this whole idea of Fail With Me with their experience, their expertise, and wisdom. So, in this particular context of workplace trauma, sometimes when we have a negative or abusive experience in workplace, then we may consider that as a failure of our professional growth. So that is how I associate the topic towards this theme in this podcast. And the first thing I would like to hear from you is, how does the idea of Fail With Me sit with you? And if there is anything you want to talk about it based on your experience and expertise.
Yes, well, so Fail With Me, I love the title, and I love it mostly because in it is the idea that if you can find what you think you did in a situation, you can also find the empowerment to get out, right? If you can take responsibility, which by the way I translate as the ability to respond, if you can take that responsibility, you can take back your power. So, in seeing a failure, and I think honestly, in workplace trauma and in all those situations, there's a lot that being done to us, right? And especially if you are stuck in a certain situation, that is just, I mean, then where do you find your way out? And by looking at it from a what can I do about this situation? You take that back and you take back that power. You ask me what is a little bit of my personal story with that. So I was in corporate positions for a very long time. I was basically a 9 to 5 ladder climber, right? I started immediately, well, even when I was still in university, I started working for this company, and all these companies had this this underlying unspoken rules that you come in, you're new to working and to the market, let's say. You come into this company, and the first thing that happens, of course, is that a company, when you have an interview, they tell you, let's see if you fit into our culture. And I think that's in essence is already something to where you start twisting and turning away and putting a little bit of your heart and a little bit of your future in the hands of somebody else. Because what happens is at that moment for me, they said, well, let's see if you fit into our culture. And so what happened is I really wanted that job. It was my first job. And so, oh, I really want this. So what happens is that you will turn a little bit to fit in, right? And in the companies where I worked for, fitting in meant working extremely hard and making such long hours. And then after we were finished working, sitting down with the people, your colleagues, your co-workers, to talk about the workday. So basically, I was there from 8 o'clock in the morning until, I don't know, 9 o'clock at night, and which is which didn't leave much time, sometimes on weekends as well, by the way, which didn't leave time for any health things like going to the gym or cooking my own meals, or and that with that eating healthy. It didn't leave time for any rest and recovery. And so my career started out like that. And I found that throughout all the changes that I made, and no matter which company I went to, and especially I went into the larger corporate companies and I started climbing the ladder there, that expectation and that working hard and working immense hours, that only got worse and worse and worse. So I know firsthand how the workplace can really have a negative effect on your life, on your friends, on your family. My workplace had, because I was barely seeing them, and how it can have a negative effect on self care and on your mind. So, this, when I walked my path, let's say, and funny enough, I started coaching people very early on in my career. And I always say the painter's house is never painted well, sort of, because when you come home and you help everybody else, you don't feel like doing your own stuff. Funny enough, I was already giving other people all these tools to work through their stress and work through their anxiety, and especially work through their imposter syndrome, and then to set boundaries so that the workplace wouldn't feel so overwhelming for them. And I didn't apply any of those tools to myself. until I got to a turning point where I was so burned out and so exhausted that, let's say, the workplace where I gave my all, that couldn't even energize me anymore. So everything around me was already less and less. And then that one place where I put all my energy in, that place basically was crumbling. And there was one very specific day and one very specific example. So I had been, which I believe is also a part of a way that a workplace can suck you in and can give you this, I call it a rat race, right? Or a donkey with a carrot. You're being shown a carrot and it's being held in front of you, and you keep on walking towards that carrot all the time, not realizing that it's on a stick that's tied to your own back. So you never really come closer. The rat race, basically. You go for something, but you never come closer. And so I had that feeling. I was growing and growing, but at some point my growth stopped. And for a couple of years it stopped in the company. Not my personal growth, of course, but in the company. I was working really hard for this promotion, and for I was working really hard on a project that they said, if you complete this wonderful project and it has high visibility, and then you will finally be seen by the people that need to make a decision about your promotion. So continue and do that project. Then one day I was already up to here. I worked like relentlessly, like 80, 90 hours a week for 3 weeks in a row. I was exhausted. My eyes were here. And it was quite funny, actually. It was, if I look at a picture of myself from that moment, you can see the blue. There was no makeup that could cover that up anymore. And but that particular day, I came to the office, and this was a big turning point. I came to the office, and like I said, the office was basically ruling my life and determining what I would do in a day, how I would feel in a day, how my emotional state would be, how my physical state would be. It was determining everything. My work was determining everything. And I came to the office, and this major project that I hung all my hopes and dreams on to get that next step, it got cancelled or postponed indefinitely. And so that for me was like, it was devastating because I needed that visibility for my next step. And so I started, and this is where I started failing. I started thinking, where did I go wrong? How could I have prevented this? And my mind went into overdrive. And I was devastated. And then on that same day, I had this meeting for another project, and there were these stakeholders, and they were all saying, "Oh, we want dates, and we want this, and we want that." And I gave them all these. I was so tired, and I gave them all these commitments that I knew, but I just couldn't set my boundaries. I was so tired that I couldn't set my boundaries. I couldn't say no. And then when I did say no, they pressured me a little bit more. And at some point, I just gave up. And so that pressure and that those expectations, I just decided, you know what? I'll figure it out later, because I just didn't have the willpower anymore to say no. And then on that same day, some other little things happen here and there, other project that got delayed, and a friend of mine saying, "Hey, I haven't seen you in forever." And I couldn't find a slot in my calendar to meet with her, which also made me feel like a failure, right? Things in my private life started crumbling as well. And that was somehow because, of course, all the setbacks and then that meeting and then my friend, that it all just it weighed so heavy on me, and I felt that pressure. And then at the end of the day, of course at the end of the day, my manager called me into his office, and he he told me, "Listen, that promotion, that we you have been working so hard for, I'm afraid it's not going to happen. And they turned around something in the organization, and it's not going to happen. And he said it in a very matter of fact way, and he knew how invested I was, but he said it in such a matter of fact way, like no emotion, no, are you okay? And so I felt like at that moment, I it was like, okay, I've been working like 2.5 years to get to that point. And then he said something that today I still think is not really how it's supposed to be. He said, well, but you know what? For that type of position, you really need to be a little bit more politically sophisticated. And by the way, you're way too good at what you do here. So nobody really wants you to move. And that was like, that broke me. I walked out of his office, like almost in tears, but trying to hold it, of course, because if somebody is so matter of fact, you don't want to express your emotions in front of them. And I walked out of that office and I thought to myself, I didn't even think. I was just numb. I just shut down. And I went through that. I stayed in the office because I didn't know what to do with myself. I was so, there's there was just something in me that I was so disconnected from myself and from my feelings and from what just happened. I was just flabbergasted. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I stayed into the office, and it was already the end of the day when I had that conversation with my manager. And I waited basically until everybody else went home. And then I went to the empty parking lot because I was the last one out again. And I sat into my car and I just lost it. I broke down in tears and I sobbed uncontrollably. And I sat there for, I think, what must have been like an hour just in crying my eyes out. And I went home and I, all the way driving. And of course, because at the end of the day, it was so, it was almost hilarious, but I forgot to put gas in my car. And because I was in such a state, I didn't realize that the light was blinking. I didn't even notice. And so about 8-10 minute walk from home, my car stopped and it didn't have more gasoline. It just stopped. And I had to walk the last bit home on heels this high. So not the favorite thing to do, I can tell you, for a lady. And so I got my stuff out of the car and I walked home. And on my way home, and this was really my turning point, on my way home, I had to cross train tracks. And so I walked, and when I was on the train tracks, I looked down, and for a second, just for a second, I thought to myself, what if I just sat down here? It would be so easy. A train would come and everything would be over. And then I snapped out of it because a train actually did come. And it was like bling, 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 bling. Everything started to move to indicate that there was a train. And so I snapped out of it and I walked ahead. But stepping off that, I turned around to look at the train passing. And I thought, that's too much. That's what did I just think? That thought going through my head, seriously? Am I giving up? What am I giving up for my work? What am I and that's when I started asking myself, because I've been asking myself all these questions the entire day. What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? I screwed up the project somehow. I could have prevented it from being cancelled. There was no way I could have prevented it from being cancelled because it was a legislation change. So no matter what I would have done, there was no way, but I blamed myself for it anyway. then with the meeting of the where I got pressured, where I felt pressured, and I said all these, gave all these commitments. Why did I give those commitments? I'm such an idiot. Nobody is ever going to take their commitment back. They're going to pressure me. I'm going to have to work for 80 hours a week in the next coming weeks, etc., etc., etc. All these thoughts going through my head. And then, of course, with my friends, oh, I'm letting my friends down. I'm such a bad friend, which then went into I'm such a bad person. I never get to do, and then I went all victimhood on myself. I never get to do what I like. Why don't I have time for this? Why don't I have time for that? Why don't I have time for this? And then, of course, with my manager telling me that, I went into blaming him and blaming myself. I didn't I didn't work hard enough on being politically correct. Why did I always use the wrong words to express myself? Why didn't I make more connections with the people that mattered? Why did I? Why did I? And so those thoughts all were in my head, right, when I stepped out of that car. And when I look back at that train passing, I thought, what the hell am I doing to myself? And all of a sudden, all that, all of it, it just fell into place. Like there has to be a way that I can take my power back. And so there has to be a way that I can stop myself from feeling this anxious, this stressed, from going over my boundaries all the time, and from letting people influence me like that. There has to be a way that I can take control, that I can somehow build a boundary, that I can somehow protect my energy, that I can protect my time, that I can protect. There has to be something I can do. And of course, then I also looked at my colleagues, and some of them were stressed. I saw that. But they seemed to be doing all this stuff so easy. And so it was quite a journey from that moment to deal with all that workplace pressure. Because, mind you, this was a workplace where the pressure was really high. So it was not a place of wellness. There was there were so many things there that were unfair, that were simply not the way that a workplace is supposed to be, that were unsafe, that were it was a constant hit on on you. But I did decide to take my power back. Sorry, I've been talking a lot.
Thank you for sharing your journey. And as someone who has worked in the technology domain for last 2 decades, I can totally relate to the situations you are referring to here.
Is there a personal story that you have that you can
I
share?
have many personal stories that I can talk about, and I am curious to hear from you as to how to handle such scenarios when they happen in a workplace. When you join a new workplace and you are told, are you a cultural fit for that organization? And just to get accepted, we accommodate. It starts with little bits and then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger without us noticing that it is creating a pressure on us. It is eating us, our confidence and things like that. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to mention 3 or 4 sort of scenarios that I have come across. The most common one is fear tactic. So when you join somewhere, you're usually new and then you're trying to accommodate yourself in the environment, then people try to scare you. Oh, you cannot do this. You're not suitable for this. You're not good enough. That sort of fear. You're not You don't have a career here. Okay, you're doing the whole thing wrong, and saying things like you don't have the credibility to deliver. One angle to look at it.
You want me to
Sometimes
respond to
mixed.
that first before you go into the next one? So first thing is that you have to, and I know that's difficult when you're in a situation, but you have to remember it's them, not you. When when you look at people that are leaders, people that are truly going to be great in this life, they lift you up. They don't push you down. So understand that it's them, not you. And whatever is going on in their world, it can be because of old habits, or it can be because they are bullied. It can be because they're very hurt. But it's them, not you. Because if you have a true leader and or a true peer, or it's somebody that's good at what they do, they will lift you up. Nobody will ever push you down if they are a true leader. So that's the most important thing to remember. And it's a very, fear is very subtle, right? And we get, if people say these things to us, that's really workplace trauma. Also, don't underestimate how much trauma that actually is. Don't say to yourself, well, I'm, it's me, I am just sensitive, because a lot of these things we get told, right? Ah, don't be sensitive. Even when we take them home, when we talk to our family and our friends that are not in the situation at that moment, and do not hear the person say those words to you, like you're not good enough, or you have to you're not skilled enough, or you don't have enough knowledge, or you're not social enough, or whatever they say you're not enough of. When you bring that home out of love for you, your family and your friends will try to make you feel better. And how do they make you feel better? By saying, I'm sure it will pass, or I'm sure you will, it will get better, or maybe you can find another job. And it's not that easy. I know it comes from a place of loving you, but it feels like you're very alone in that as well, right? But most important thing, remember it's not you, and acknowledge what is done to you. And acknowledge that not in a way like they need to change, because a person, when they are in that same state, right, in that same company, and they treat you like that, they are in a certain pattern as well. And when you look at how you can influence things, there is always a circle of things that you cannot influence. Then there's a circle of things that you can try to influence. And then there's a circle of things that you can control. And within the circle of control, the only person that's in there is you. The only thing you can really control is you. And so the thoughts that are going through your head, if you look at fear, are, for example, what if they are right? And what if what if they fire me because I do not have enough knowledge? What if I won't pass that exam that they want me to do? What if I don't pass this, how do you call that thing they do every year to indicate that you're
Um,
socially
yes,
okay?
like appraisals and stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Appraisals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feedback loops, all things. And so that's, you are starting to anticipate things that will happen in the future. And your fear comes from anticipating things in the future. What if? And so with fear, and it's very real, huh? Don't get me wrong, these types of things are very real. But when you are in fear, you are in a survival part of the brain. And you are by definition not creative, not open, not, you won't see possibilities. And so for you, what can, if you are in fear, what you can do about that is make sure you get out of that flight or fight or freeze mode that you are in, and or fawn, which means that you are trying to please somebody. So get yourself out of that fear state as best as you can. Now, how do you do that? It can be very simple. It can be as simple as, and it's simple but not easy. Let me put it like that. It can be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths, or focusing on a physical sensation. So, like rubbing your fingers over your hand with your full concentration. That takes you out of the survival brain and puts you into that creative brain. And from that creative brain, you can start to see solutions. You also, from that creative brain, you are proactive. So you can take charge instead of being reactive and responding. This is the part that makes you think, oh, how do I want to respond? What is the best way to respond? So in case of fear, from this brain, we will start from the fight or flight or freeze or fawn. We will start to say, for example, in fawn, oh yes, of course, I will do that immediately, of course. And while in this place, the moment you are here, you will say, well, I think that your response towards me, or the words towards me, are inappropriate, which from a fear perspective sounds like I could never ever say that. Yet when you are calm and when you are in the part of the brain that is creative, the words come out very easily. So then it all comes down to mindfulness and being present and stopping your brain from going into that future and thinking the worst case scenarios, and letting it go into the future thinking of the best case scenario, and forcing it to think of the best case scenario, right? The fear
Absolutely.
part.
Absolutely. Totally understand that. And I can tell you that it definitely makes a big difference. And the other pointers that I have in mind, you actually have answered that already. I mean, what you said, it kind of, as a thumb rule, we can apply to other sessions as well. It is basically being present in that moment and not getting into the fear or anxious or insecure part of the mind, and controlling the emotions getting the better of us, the building of emotional intelligence and understanding that boundary. What I feel that these traumas, they start because one is our self awareness or our emotional intelligence is not truly built in that moment or not functional in that moment, and the boundary management in a way that something unpleasant happens before it starts affecting us, we before we get sucked into that negativity, we can stop that and we can control that whatever is happening from affecting us. If I look back at my career now, these are the things I try to tell my past self so that I can do better in future. And I think that it's, again, I'll go back to the beginning of our discussion, is that accommodating ourselves into getting accepted into the organizational culture. Somehow that is rooted in the need of approval, that you need someone's approval to get accepted. Whereas again, what you mentioned, that there are these three circles, that one you cannot influence, one you can influence, and one you can truly control. If that is there with me from day one, I don't think no amount of abuse or harm or humiliation can affect us. So thank you for explaining that so beautifully. I think you answered the strategies so perfectly. You explained it so beautifully.
Mm.
Other things that I had in mind was on the similar lines, as in, say, I am not feeling confident or secure. I'm in a group of people, and then I am insulted all of a sudden. And then no one is speaking up for that. I feel that is affecting me. But I guess the three layers that you mentioned, what we control and influence, we can apply the same thinking in such situations, and we can come out of it without letting it affect us. So,
Yes,
yeah, thank you for that. I'll
there
go
is.
to something else related to my experience. I have seen these kind of scenarios have a long lasting effect on people. As in, you mentioned that do not undermine the trauma. Absolutely. I'm not trying to undermine that. What I'm trying to bring up is it stays with people even if they have left that workplace. Something toxic happened with me, and I am still carrying it in the next workplace. It's like a relationship that didn't work, and then you move on to the next, but still you're carrying the fragments or the broken pieces with yourself to the next one. You talked about it in the beginning that we should always forward think, that how we can change the perspective in future. If someone is struggling with past workplace trauma, then how do they move on from there, or how do they heal from there, or get over it?
Thank you for that question. Beautiful question. So this, so there's several things. What the way we get into it and the way we get out of it. So when we, of course, when we physically leave something, it doesn't mean that we are also emotionally and mentally have left the situation, right? We need to realize that it's a triangle. There's three components, in actually four. I believe that spiritually there is something that is still attached as well. And so on those pillars, when you truly want to leave a situation behind, so first, just uh, getting into that, and that's why I said don't diminish your experience and don't diminish your trauma. It's because do you know the story of the frog and the boiling water? It's like if you get a frog, like a normal frog, and please do not try this. Right? Do not, the poor animal, do not try this. But if you get a frog and you have a pot of boiling water and you throw the frog in the boiling water, the frog jumps out because it feels the water and it's a shock, and so it jumps out. Now you would think that it would also do that when the water gets hot enough, but if you put a frog in cold water and you slowly start to heat up that water until boiling point, it will boil to death because it will not jump out of the water. Now, this is how this trauma builds up over the years. As a person, you are the frog in the water, and your environment is slowly adding a little bit more pressure, another little bit of pressure, just like the heat of the frog, another little bit of pressure. And slowly you start to get used to that toxicity, right? And that trauma coming at you. That doesn't mean that it's normal. That does not mean that when you have reached the boiling point, that you somehow are to blame for the person that put you in the pot. You are slowly getting used to the pressure until your system, your body, your mind, your emotional state, and your spirit can no longer handle it. And that's the boiling point. And so recognizing that boiling point is very important. And knowing that you have had that boiling point, it's like an egg, right? Once you cook it, you cannot uncook it. And so you have, well, an egg will never uncook, but the thing is, you have reached that point and then you left. But in you is still all that building up of the stress and building up of everything. Now, getting out of that across the four pillars. So you physically left and you are now working at a different place. So mentally, I think the way to get, so if you look at the four pillars, we have spiritual, emotional, and mental left, right? Mentally, it's about controlling your thoughts and controlling your emotions because they basically go in a loop. Now, because you think something, then you feel something, or you feel something and then you think something, right? And that's simply the loop in which it works. And of course, spiritually, there is this now you're gone out of that environment. And what can I learn? What can I see that I take with me from that environment that is valuable to me today? So I think for me, it started with that. It started with being grateful, funny enough, for all the lessons that I learned from that environment, from those environments, because it wasn't just one. And I could see, if I looked back at it without judgment, I could see that for each of those environments, I learned something. I learned something about myself. I learned something about setting boundaries. I learned something about what I would and would not accept in my life. I learned new skills that I needed for the next phase of my life. And so, if I look back at my experience, even though the experience itself in that moment was something like traumatic, right? Standing on those train tracks, that was for a reason. And having those thoughts, they were traumatic. And that whole looking back at that and looking at my life today and seeing how that shaped me, how that formed me, how that made me choose for my purpose and made me choose to support people that are still in that situation. Looking back at it, I can be deeply grateful for those moments. Now, that's tremendously hard if you're in it. But even when I was in it, I was looking back at other situations, saying, thanks to those situations, I'm here today. And today I can say, thanks to those situations, I'm here today. So, working on that on a spiritual level, and it's work, it's not a snap and you are out of it. It's work, but it's worth it. Because from those experiences, spiritually speaking, I truly believe that we are shaped to become who we are meant to be. And we have these experiences because something or someone or a higher power is guiding us to where we are supposed to be. And that if we learn from those experiences, that we can see the path in front of us and that we can see that where we came from was all needed to know where we are going and to be good at where we are going and to be our best selves. So for me, that's the spiritual part. Then on the mental and emotional part, it's really that mindfulness, that controlling your thoughts. And the only way to control your thoughts is, like I said, to get out of that fear-based survival brain and get into the growth brain, the creative brain. And all research shows that there are several ways you can do that, but the absolute simplest and best way to do that is with mindfulness. And just to, like I said, take 3 deep breaths, or if you cannot or don't want to do that, touch your skin or a piece of fabric. Look outside and look at the colors, smell the air, listen to sounds, be there in the moment, or taste the first bite of your lunch without distraction to get you into a different loop. And it's basically going from a vicious circle where your thoughts and your emotions are pulling you down negatively into a virtuous circle where they help each other. Yeah.
It is very beautifully explained, and which is why I try to take a walk every so often, whether it's during the day or it is in the evening. I feel that the moment you connect with green or something in the nature or maybe water, it changes your perspective differently. It gives you that gratitude from inside, and then you are able to let go some of that hurt that sometimes with trauma as we are carrying with ourselves. I will ask you something related to burnout. You mentioned burnout definitely, and you talked about mindfulness. What I've seen is in my friends, in my colleagues, in a lot of people who are in living this corporate life, that they have this stress, they have this burnout, they have this poor emotional intelligence, let's call it that. And instead of interrupting that cycle and coming out of it, they are compensating that with something else. Could be eating, could be booze, could be binge watching something, it could be anything. I mean, instead of turning things around, we are holding on to that hurt, that trauma, and we are repeating that cycle. So basically, we are coping from time to time. So we are not doing ourselves any favor. We are not stopping that and we're not moving on. Instead, we are repeating the same thing again and again. And I'll mention this why I'm bringing this up. So I am a hobbyist writer. So I have written 2 poetry collections. And for the longest time, I used to think that I have to channel my suffering, my pain into the creativity. Okay. I didn't think about healing or didn't think that an alternative of the pain or frustration was possible. I thought that I have to channel that into writing. But recently, about a year ago, I've had attended a somatic workshop and where we talked about mindfulness. We did a few interesting exercises, and that changed my perspective towards everything very differently. And now I see that if I am writing, I'm writing from an inspiration. I'm not writing from hurt or pain. Okay. I mentioned my writing into this process because I think that if I go back a couple of years, so it is no different than getting addicted to something, just thinking that writing is the way out. It's basically compensating that hurt with something else. So, as a coach, if you see someone who is stuck, who is with burnout, with this hurt, frustration, and they're repeating the cycle, what would you suggest them? What strategies would you give them that you can stop and you can give yourself a better life?
So that's a deep question actually. And the reason it's so deep is because it touches so many things. As I'm a Tony Robbins trained coach. And so with people that are stuck and repeating the same loop over and over again, I use his methods. So one of his methods is that there are 6 human needs, and he has a model to measure the 6 human needs. And so each person has a different configuration. of those six human needs. Now, if you have a behavior that you repeat over and over and over again, even though you are trying to step out, an addictive behavior, or even maybe it's not addictive, but you have a cycle that you have a year that you are in it, and then a year that you are out it, and then a year that you're in it. It's also a type of repetition, even though it's not a strong addiction like smoking or drinking or eating or working. So what happens is that we have certain needs, and when the needs are met with an addiction, and our highest needs are met with an addiction, we repeat them until we find another another way to satisfy those needs. And so the what happens is, for example, we all have a need for love and connection. And when we score very high on that need for love and connection, we tend to love ourselves when with, for example, food, and we soothe ourselves with food, and that then it's very difficult to get out of that cycle because food basically is easy, it's accessible, you can get it like this. And so every time we feel that we need some self love and we feel that we have lost connection with ourselves, we grab a cookie. Now, that grabbing a cookie is a way to satisfy the need for love and connection, in this case with ourselves. But there's other ways that you could satisfy that same need. Now, of course, that grabbing a cookie is a habit that builds over time. So you can change that habit. You can either, with willpower, you can change it like that, or you have to sort of wind it down and take one cookie instead of three, etc., right? And but the most important thing is that you need a certain amount of love and connection. And so you can find a different way to satisfy that love and connection. Either, for example, by calling a friend, or by sitting with yourself, or by getting a facial, in my case, or by allowing a little bit of self love. And it's that's by understanding which needs you have, you will you will be able to figure out what ways you can satisfy those needs differently than the habit you have installed for it right now. Also, we don't change a habit or a behavior until because it's in our survival brain again. And our survival brain loves to keep everything exactly the way it is. Because we know your survival brain is not there to help you be happy or to make you thrive it's there to make your system, your body, survive and reproduce so that the species can continue. It's very biological. It's a biological process. And so it's not there to help you. The other part of the brain is. That's the part that helps you. So it will try to keep you exactly where you are. Why? Because today you are alive, and that means that you have survived all those years up to today doing what you do. And so that brain says, well, no, and it's a strong part of us, right? I want to keep you exactly where you are because being exactly where you are is what kept you alive. Now, if you want to be happy, on the other hand, you need to grow. So you need to change. You need to take yourself out of that comfort zone and make sure that you get into well, growth. That's growth and contribution. Those are the more spiritual needs of a person. And so to be happy, you need those. Now, what happens inside of you is an inner conflict, as we coaches call it. It's when this part of the brain that doesn't want change starts a little bit of a battle with this part of the brain that does want change. Now, being aware of that helps a lot. And I would say what really helps in breaking habits, what I found is find a community of people, not of people that are trying to break the habit as well. Find find a community of people that have broken the habit that you want to break. So when you want to go to the gym every day, join a group that is already going to the gym every day. Don't join a group that's thinking about it, right? Because then you all think about it and then you're all in this part of the brain. And sometimes somebody will break free of it and actually go to the gym every day. But chances are that it's the other way around, that one person will give up and the next will give up and the next will give up, etc., etc., etc. So find a group that is already doing what you want to do and connect with that community so that you get uplifted and you get into that mindset, and so that you can help. People are in their being, 90% of the people, if you ask them, hey, what did you do to break this habit, they love to share their story. They love to help you. And even if it's just the first step, they don't have to help you from 0 to 100, right? If they help you from 0 to half a step, you are half a step further than you were. And so people will always share these types of things with you if you could just put yourself out there and connect with them.
That is
Make sense?
so beautifully explained. Thank you for such a deep insight into this. I think we have covered some of the most important aspects in this space. I'm sure someone listening into this conversation, they are definitely benefited by it. For our listeners, can you share how they can work with you if they are interested?
Oh, absolutely. So if you look me up on Google, if you type in rat race recovery, I immediately come up. Besides from that, under my name, Carolina Bakker, I'm on LinkedIn and I love to hear from people on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel.
I will be sharing the notes and links into the episode. So if anyone wants to work with you, can they reach out to you through your website and LinkedIn, etc.? Yeah.
Absolutely. So through my website and through LinkedIn. And I'm also on YouTube where I actually post a lot of meditations and 3-minute mindfulness exercises. So I would recommend people that are on this journey to have a look there as well.
Wonderful. It was great talking to you and hearing from you. And most importantly, let's hope that we can make a difference by talking about it, by sharing these strategies, and we make the world a better place.
Oh, yes, that is indeed one of my main goals. As many people out of this situation as there possibly can be out of this situation because it's not normal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Stories and Stanza today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.